How's it everyone, this is Local, and in today's video we're going to be talking about my League starter for 3.22. It's a Poison Blade Vortex Pathfinder. I've done a lot of testing and this is one of the smoothest mapping builds, but also well-rounded builds that I've ever League started with. This will be able to tackle juice mapping as well as killing any of the bosses you need to collect your void stones, and it works very comfortably on a very low budget of just a divine or two. But it can be scaled to then tackle very end game content like 80% deli, or if you want to do uber bosses, you can. This guide is also my most thorough to date. In the POB, you're going to find a detailed leveling guide, a budget version of the build, as well as an ultra endgame version. I've also created a spreadsheet in which you'll find a lot of information about the build. There's a shopping list, there's a leveling guide, there's an FAQ, there's information on scaling the damage and defenses, there's a help section, pretty much everything you need to help you get the build all the way from the Twilight Strands to maps and then into uber bossing or 80% deli if you want to do that. But with that out of the way, let's get into it. All of the stuff I just mentioned will be linked in the description, so if you just want to look at it, check the description. Now we're going to go into the full build guide section where we talk about everything. So our primary skill is Blade Vortex, and we are scaling poison damage and chaos damage with this primarily. So we're using the Blade Vortex to apply poisons. The way this skill works is you hold it down, it builds up charges. You can have up to 10 blades spinning around you. They last for a duration, and you charge up and then you run through packs of monsters and kill them. It's very straightforward. You do have to stop and recharge once in a while, but they do last for long enough that you don't have to do it too often. We can also use Vaal Blade Vortex. This allows us to throw out a Blade Vortex that then chases down monsters and does increased damage. Mainly just use this for bossing to apply more poisons, but yep, that is an optional thing. But if you're primarily mapping, rather go for a level 21 Blade Vortex instead of a level 20 Vaal Blade Vortex. We're also linking our Blade Vortex with Unleash support. So this kind of stores charges. So when we push our spacebar, it actually generates 4 charges, like you can see there, 4 charges. And then again, these replenish quite quickly. Without this Unleash support, it would generate 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, like you see there. So Unleash, super nice. We can also get Awakened Unleash. The rest of the gems all just relate to poison damage and doing more poison damage with our Blade Vortex. Next up, we have Plague Bearer. You can think of this skill sort of like Righteous Fire, however, it doesn't always have uptime. The way it works is that by applying poisons, it incubates charges, so it gains plague value, and then once you decide to start dispensing that plague, you push the button again and it does an AoE aura effect with poison. So this is really nice just to help supplementing our clear while mapping. However, when you die or when you log in, just push the button once so that it is active. If we remove it, you'll see that it is not active at the top, so you're not going to gain charges while it is not active. You push it, now you have the buff, and as you apply poisons with your Blade Vortex, it'll gain charges. Next up, I think we need to talk about our curses. So the main curses we are using are Despair. This curse enemies have reduced chaos resistance because poison damage does chaos damage. This is really nice. We're also using Temporal Chains. The reason we use this is that it allows us to stack more poisons on the monster and have them last longer, dealing a greater total poison damage from our poisons. However, this did receive a slight nerf in 3.22, so other effects on cursed enemies expire 25% slower. It's currently 40, but it was nerfed to 25%, so we are losing some total poison damage, but this shouldn't actually affect mapping that much. So these two curses are great. We're linking them with Arcanist Brand. So what Arcanist Brand does is it casts a brand, and then when that brand attaches to an enemy, it will cast the linked skills. So in this case, it will cast Despair and Temporal Chains without having to push 2 different buttons. You just push this one button and it'll apply both curses. Primarily use this for bossing. However, we have also linked it with Hex Bloom. The way that Hex Bloom works is that hexes from supported skills transfer to all nearby enemies in a range of 30 when Hex enemy dies. So if you're mapping and you want a bit of extra damage, you drop your Arcanist Brand on a pack of monsters, then it'll curse a monster, and when you kill that monster, the curse will spread throughout the rest of the pack. So this is really nice for mapping. Next up, for auras, we have a few options here. Ideally, what we want to use is Haste. Haste is going to give us increased movement speed and cast speed, also attack speed, but it's irrelevant. Then Herald of Agony. This is a very important one. We do need to use Herald of Agony. This grants us more damage with poison, so we're getting a lot of damage with this. It also summons a little Agony Crawler, which I guess does a little bit of damage. Pretty negligible. However, another thing that's very important about this is the buff grants 20% chance of poison on hit. So we need this to reach 100% chance of poison with our Blade Vortex. If you don't have that 100%, it won't feel as good, but that's primarily the reason we use Herald of Agony. As for our other aura, we do have a few options. So if you want, at the end of the campaign when you're transitioning into maps, you can, instead of using Haste and Determination, what I recommend is maybe using Purity of Elements and Determination. So Purity of Elements, this grants us elemental ailment immunity. It also grants us a lot of elemental resistances. This means that while this is up, you cannot be frozen, ignited, shocked, all of that nasty stuff that'll get you killed. And the resistances free up suffixes on our gear. So if you're feeling greedy, you can run Haste, or what you can do is go Purity of Elements Haste or Purity of Elements Determination. I really like Purity of Elements. It solves a lot of problems for the build. I know a lot of people think it's cringe, but for early on, Purity of Elements is my pick. So I would probably, for early mapping, go Determination, Purity of Elements, and Herald of Agony. And then once we get a bit of extra mana reservation, we can pop in Defiance Banner or a mid-low level Vitality. Defiance Banner adds a little bit of additional armor and evasion ratings. So this is nice. So these will be our 4 auras. This does change in the Uber boss version or the Uber version of the build. But for now, this is what I would go with. If your resistances are capped and also you are not worried about dying from freezes, like you have freeze immunity on your FLASK, you can instead just run Haste. Another very important aura is our Malevolence. So Malevolence, what it does is it grants us more damage over time. Poison is a damage over time. It also grants us increased skill effect duration. So if we look at our Blade Vortex, each one of our blades, you can see it says duration. I'm trying to point at the screen. Duration 6.92 seconds. If we push this, it goes up to 8.4 seconds. So this is a very nice thing. Not only does it increase the damage we're doing, it also makes our blades last longer. Now we are linking this with Divine Blessing. For those of you who don't know how this works, this essentially turns your auras into a temporary buff. We push it and we have our Malevolence up for 16 seconds. We're also linking it with Inspiration. This reduces the cost of it. You can see the cost is 378 mana, 245 life. I'll explain why it's like that. But if we take it off, you can see it's a fair bit higher. It takes a bigger chunk of our energy shield. If you do have a nice pool of energy shield, I'll talk about the energy shield later, you can instead swap this Inspiration out for an increased duration support, or you can run a 4-link Malevolence, Inspiration, Divine Blessing, and increased duration. So that'll make it last for, I believe, 24 seconds or something like that. So those are our auras. As for our movement skills, we're going with the classic Shield Charge. This is the fastest movement skill that we have access to. However, the downside is that it doesn't allow us to traverse up and down terrain height adjustments. So if there's like a little ridge, you can't Shield Charge down it or up it. So in order to supplement that, we're going to be using Flame Dash alongside it, which will allow us to move more instantly and also up and down terrain. So just for mapping, with shield charging around, which is nice with our Blade Vortex. We have our Blade Vortex up, we just shield charge through monsters, and then if we need to do instant dodges, we can use our Flame Dash. Last thing is Withering Step. We can place this on our left click if we want. You can also use it on another button, but this build is a bit button starved. The way that this works is it grants a buff that grants phasing and elusive, and while you have this buff, monsters that enter the area around you will be withered. Withered is something we'll talk about. It's an important part of scaling the damage of this build. So we place that on our left click, and then it's just automatically going to be used as we run around. One important note is that the moment you use a skill while you have your Withering Step, the effects are immediately going to end. So what you want to do is charge up your BV and then start running around and flame dashing around. And then monsters that enter your area will be withered. Now would be a good time to talk about Wither, because it is an important layer of damage scaling on this build. So what Wither does is it's a debuff that applies 6% increased chaos damage taken on the target. We can stack this up to 15 stacks. So 15 times 6 is 90% increased chaos damage. If you can get those 15 stacks, it adds a lot of damage, especially against bosses. However, each stack has a duration of 2 seconds, and adding new stacks doesn't refresh all of the previous stacks. So each stack has an independent duration and won't be refreshed by added stacks. So getting up to 15 is easier said than done. We can increase the duration that Wither lasts with a few different tools. So it'll be probably fairly easy to hit 10 Wither stacks fairly consistently. 15, it's not out of the question, but a lot of builds will put 15 Wither debuffs in PoE to inflate the damage somewhat. And I will talk about Wither scaling in a bit, but that's why we use Withering Step. It has multiple uses, and Wither is important, and we do have multiple sources of Wither application. Now let's move on to some of the gear. So our primary uniques that we're going to be using, Dendrobate. This is super good, super nice for our build for a number of reasons. So firstly, it grants us a nice chunk of energy shield. We are going to be using Eldritch Battery on this build, which I will explain a bit later. Also grants us some resistances, and it grants us Socket Gems are supported by level 10 chance of poison, which grants us another 40% chance of poison. Also, increase damage with poison while you have at least 300 dexterity. So this is a breakpoint we need to make sure we hit 300 dexterity, and then increase poison duration if you have at least 150 intelligence. This is going to increase our overall poison damage. So Dendrobate, very cheap item on League Start, very common. Obviously, if the meta shifts, it will affect the price, but it is a very, very common unique, so I can't imagine it costing more than a couple of chaos a day or two into the league. What's also nice about this chest is we can grab this point on the tree, 15% increased maximum life if there are no life modifiers on equipped body armor. So not only is it this, but we also get 15% life from that. The other important unique is Obliteration. This grants us physical as extra chaos damage, and enemies you kill have a 20% chance to explode, dealing a quarter of their maximum life as chaos damage. This is why you see the little explosions on screen. It's sort of like a baby profane bloom. It's super nice. It helps our mapping significantly. However, for bossing, we can slot in a cold iron point that will grant us more levels to our Blade Vortex, which means more damage. And we don't really need the explosions for bossing, so the cold iron point, also a fairly cheap, common-ish unique, is super nice for bossing. Another unique, Ming's Heart, also fairly common. Depending on the meta, it shouldn't be that expensive, but this grants us a massive amount of physical damage as extra chaos damage. Also a ton of chaos resistance, so getting chaos resistance caps on this build, or at least close to it, is very easy. Next up, Dawnbreaker. This is optional. You can use this if you want. You can also use a +1 physical shield. And again, if this is going too fast, don't worry, it's all in the spreadsheet. This grants us a bit of cold, lightning, and fizz taken as fire, and then we can combine this with a ruby flask to just reduce the amount of damage that we're taking. It also grants us a lot of armor, which is nice, often over 2000, especially if you apply quality to it. So this is a nice option. Now let's talk about our flasks. This is very important. I'm doing this before the other piece of gear because I can't overstate how important it is to roll your flask properly. This is a very important defensive layer, especially on Pathfinder. We're taking quite a few flask nodes, and the Pathfinder itself has buffs to flasks. So please treat your flasks with the same respect you would any other piece of gear. Firstly, what you want to do is apply quality to your flask. If the flask is white, you can use 4 Glassblower's baubles to get it to 20%. If it's magic, you'll have to use 10. But once you have your flask, very important, firstly apply quality. Next, Divine Life Flask. This is going to be our main life flask, and we want instant recovery when on low life as a prefix. So if your life dips below 50%, you hit this, it applies all of it instantly. Very important defensive layer. Make sure you get this. Also as a suffix, grants immunity to bleeding and corrupted blood, is very good. Then let's pop onto Quicksilver. This is, it's mandatory, I would say. It makes you go faster. Movement speed is a very important defensive layer. So we have this, it grants us increased movement speed during effect. You can, as a prefix, there's a few modifiers that are nice. Reduced flask charges use, increase maximum charges are all very nice. I do want to draw your attention to this prefix though. Increase effect, reduce duration. This is a really strong modifier, however, it can be a bit of a bait, especially for bossing. If your flasks run out, you're going to be very sad. So early on, I would not use this modifier. Later on, you can, but early on, don't roll this modifier. Maximum charges or increased duration or reduced flask charges used like this, those are all great prefixes. But on this one, for suffixes, we can get things like movement speed. If you're not using Purity of Elements, you can get immunity to ignite or freeze. However, another really nice suffix is additional elemental resistances during effect. We have very high uptime on our flasks with very high increased flask effect. So you can see here we push this, our resistances skyrocket, and this actually frees up a lot of pressure on the suffixes on the rest of our gear. So again, there is a list of the mods that are good in the spreadsheet. On top of that, we can use a granite flask. Early mapping, you can use a granite and a jade. So early would probably be life, jade, quartz, granite, quicksilver. But this grants us increased armor during effect. We push that, armor goes up. So again, prefixes, duration, reduced charges used, increased charges, and then as a suffix, increased armor during effect. As for our quartz flask, this grants us phasing. So phasing is very important for Blade Vortex. It allows us to just run through packs of monsters. If you are spell suppression capped, this by the way also gives us a bit of extra spell suppression. If you have spell suppression capped, then what you can do is instead use Sin's Rebirth. You can also get alternate sources of phasing from the tree, evasion and phasing, 10% chance to gain phasing for 4 seconds on kill. You can also get it from Abyss Jewels, chance to gain phasing on kill, but it is nice to have this just as a safety net. As for our other flask, we have a couple of options. So firstly, Sin's Rebirth. This is nice. It grants us Unholy Might during effect. This is 30% of physical as extra chaos damage. Pushing that makes the damage go up quite a lot. It does use a lot of charges on use. This is nice for bossing. You can use it for mapping if you feel like you need a bit of damage. It shouldn't be too expensive on League Start, meta dependent, but this is a great option. If you are using Dawnbreaker, you want to combine that with a Ruby Flask. This grants us fire resistance and less fire damage taken. You can also use Bismuth Flask. This will again further improve our resistances and just make them ridiculously high. If you combine this with the suffix additional elemental resistances during effect, you're just getting so many resistances that you can maybe be a bit naughty and not actually cap your resistances with your gear. Don't worry, Pathfinder gets lots of charges, so you can get away with it for mapping. So these are our flask options, and very important, another thing is the enchant. Reused at the end of this flask's effect. You can also get reused when charges reach full. You get that by going to your crafting bench and you go reused. You can get it. It costs 5 instilling orbs, 5 glass blowers, baubles. That's very important. It'll mean that you don't have to constantly push your flask the whole time. So with our flask out of the way, let's talk about other pieces of gear. So our helmet. This benchcraft modifier increased duration of ailments to inflict while focused. This was nerfed in 3.22. This is a very powerful craft for poison builds. It was reduced to 31 to 40% for the unveiled modifier. We don't know the value of the benchcrafted modifier. I assume it's going to be 21 to 30%. So if you increase the duration of your ailments, as in your poisons, they're going to do a greater amount of total damage. So this is still a very good craft. When you get this craft on your item, it'll grant you a new skill called Focus. And when you push that, it'll apply all focus effects. So if you're bossing, you can use this. I don't really use this for anything other than bossing, but yeah, it's an extra button. And since it was nerfed, you don't have to use it, but I still would try and get it on your gear. Even though it was nerfed, it's still really good. If you're going to do your Maven or Exarch, see if you can get it first, and then you charge up your BV, you push your focus, and then you apply those poison stacks to the boss. As for the other modifiers, we're just going for life, and then resistances or spell suppression or life regeneration. Those are all nice. The reason that I'm so into the idea of using something like a bismuth flask is that it relieves so much pressure from your suffixes. This build does need a fair amount of attributes. You need 180, I think, for your obliteration. You need about 150 for some of your shield charge and determination, and you need 300 for Dendrobate. So by offloading some of that pressure onto your flask for resistances, we can get different suffixes. We can get strength, dexterity, intelligence, life regeneration, spell suppression on our suffixes. So that's what I would go for on a helmet. Just make sure you balance it all. Just make sure your resistances are capped with your flasks up, preferably with your flasks down too, and that you're hitting these. So that's our helmet. As for the implicits, we're going for Despair Curse Effect. Can also go for Temporal Chains Curse Effect. As for the other implicit, we're just going to go for Increased Mana Reservation Efficiency. If you do want to go all in on the Fizz Taken as, you can go Fizz Taken as Fire or Cold or Lightning or whatever. But for now, the budget version, we're going for this. As for our Amulet, we want an Agate Amulet. This is going to grant us Strength and Intelligence as an implicit. And then the Anoint, we want Exceptional Performance. Exceptional Performance is on the tree. A lot of BV builds will path all the way over here, which is really good because we get Exceptional Performance, increased skill effect duration, makes our BV last longer and our Wither and other things last longer. It also grants us this Mastery, 10% more skill effect duration. However, I tested that. Instead, going up felt a lot better, and we can anoint this for very, very cheap. So that's going to be our Anoint on our Amulet. It's just clear amber black. These are, 1C oils that we can put on our amulet. Then for the prefixes, level of all physical skill gems. This is great to increase the level of our Blade Vortex, which means more damage. Also life. And as for the suffixes, we can go for resistances, strength, intelligence, dexterity. Those are all nice on our amulet. As for our booties, let's talk about the implicits. So poisons you inflict deal damage faster is great. As for the Exarch implicit, you can get something like maximum fire resistance that pairs nicely with our Dawnbreaker if we use it, or you can get increased movement speed, increased action speed, chaos resistance, or another resistance. As for the prefixes, we're going for movement speed and life. That's most important. Our suffixes, resistances, if you are not going to rely on your flask. Also strength, dexterity, and then spell suppression, life regeneration are all great suffixes on our boots. Belt is going to be fairly similar. life, and then strength if you can get it, resistances, armor as a prefix are all nice, but then very importantly is this regenerate 150 energy shield per second while a rare or unique enemy is nearby. Essentially on this build we are using energy shield to cast our spells instead of mana, so this while bossing is really nice because we'll gain energy shield while we're doing bosses. We won't run out of energy shield. So this is a suffix. I would say this is probably the only mandatory modifier on your belt. As for the Abyssal, if you are using a Stygian Vise, you can put an Abyssal in it. You can get things like physical damage to spells, life, chaos resistance. You can also get chance to gain phasing on kill. There's a lot of nice stuff. Gloves. Now gloves are important. Again, prefixes, life, and then suffixes, resistances. Ignore the lightning damage, chance to shocked enemies. This is just something I had in my stash. But our suffixes are going to be just resistances, dexterity, intelligence, strength, all of those things. And then life is a prefix. However, let's talk about these implicits. Chaos damage leached as life. This is super good. Very, very nice for mapping because now we have a source of recovery from the chaos damage that we're doing. You can also use, with the debuffs expire slower, you can use that for bossing, but I feel like the leech is just so good. Also, the Exarch implicit, chaos damage over time multiplier, or while a unique enemy is in your presence, increase chaos damage over time multiplier. These two implicits are the reason I'm not using Astronauts. I know there's some people like, why are you not using Astronauts? Astronauts are so good. These gloves with Obliteration, I feel better than Astronauts on the budget version. In the ultimate Uber endgame version, we are using Astronauts, but for early on, it's just too much of a strain on our attributes and survivability and stuff to use Astronauts. So these implicits, super important. Our ring, life, strength, resistances, non-channeling skills have minus mana cost. This is helpful, but it's not that big a deal. You don't need to desperately try and get it. It doesn't make an insane difference, but it is nice. And I believe that is it for the gear. Let's have a quick look at this skill tree. So it is divided into different sections, so you'll know which points to take when while leveling. However, let's pop up to our level 95 tree and have a look. So we're mainly taking some life nodes over here, some life here, spell suppression, poison stuff like this, bit more life. Here's a chance of phase. You don't have to take this, but it is nice, especially if you're not using a quartz flask. Then we're also grabbing charisma, increased mana reservation efficiency of skills, and we're grabbing a little jewel socket here. This Revenge of the Hunted is life and suppression on full life, and then this mastery is very nice. 15% chance to suppress spell damage if equipped helmet, body armor, gloves, and boots all have evasion rating. So try, if you're using this, make sure that those pieces of gear have evasion. This is another reason why I'm not using Astronauts on the budget version. You can get very easy 15% chance to suppress spell damage here. Then we're grabbing some life regeneration flask nodes. Charge regeneration flask nodes. And flask gain charge every 3 seconds. Over here we're getting some more flask stuff. Reduce flask charges used. Flasks have increased effect, very powerful modifier. And over here, increased flask charges gained. Here is some more poison stuff, more life stuff. Over here, this looks a bit weird to take this pathing, but these 5 points give us chaos damage and physical damage, which is a lot of damage. If we take that out, you can see it actually makes a fairly significant drop to our damage. Then pathing up to more life, we get a bit more damage over time here and skill effect duration. Over here, grabbing growth and decay for more damage over time. Also the mastery, 15% increased skill effect duration and duration of ailments on enemies. This is super nice. Lethe Shade, this pairs very nicely with Purity of Elements against damage over time effects. So ailments last longer on us, but we take less damage over time if it started in the last second. Then we're grabbing some spell suppression. We can also grab Inveterate down here instead if you don't have enough spell suppression on your gear. And then the chance to suppress spell damage is lucky. This is nice if your spell suppression isn't capped, so you can just grab that to top it off. Over here we're just grabbing some energy shield and life nodes. This is important for our Eldritch Battery. Let's actually talk about Eldritch Battery. Spend energy shield before mana for skill mana costs. Energy shield protects mana instead of life. So this is very nice because we can reserve pretty much all of our mana with auras, and also it allows us to use a Divine Blessing aura. We will need, I believe, about 400 energy shields to use this. However, just equipping your Dendrobate should be enough to reach that cap. If you do need a little bit more energy shields, if you have an evasion energy shield helmet, you can take this mastery, 100% increased energy shield from equipped helmet. So that's Eldritch Battery. Over here we're grabbing Whispers of Doom, so we can apply additional Curse, Despair, and Temp Chains. Here we're just getting some more poison related stuff and a bit more aura related stuff. And then over here we're grabbing Force Shaper. We get Fizz as extra chaos, bit of increased Fizz damage. However, this mastery, 40% increased physical damage with skills that cost life. This is very nice, but you might be thinking, but we're using energy shield to cast our things, so why are we taking this? We get this mastery over here. Skills cost life instead of 30% of mana cost. So all of our skills actually have a life cost associated with them. So by doing that, we actually get an easy 40% increased physical damage with skills that cost life. Also drawing your attention to this Chaos Mastery, 5% chance when you inflict Withered to instead inflict up to 15 Withered debuffs instead. This is actually really nice on BV. We have a very high hit rate, and this should ensure that we're at least fairly reliably getting a high amount of Withered debuffs. In my POB, I've only set it to 10, but you can put it up to 15 to make the damage look better, but I've set it at 10. So the spreadsheet and this leveling guide will explain everything to you, but I just wanted to go over it. Let's also just go over our Ascendancy. So in order of the points that we are allocating, Master Toxicist, when you kill a poison enemy during any FLASK effect, nearby enemies are poisoned. Poisons you inflict during any FLASK effect have a 20% chance to deal 100% more damage. This is super good. It's poison proliferation. So even though our BV has a fairly small area of effect, we're still spreading the poisons throughout the pact. And also with Obliteration, we're getting good clear from the explosions. Also, Nature's Reprisal, 25% chance to inflict Withered for 2 seconds on hit. 50% increased effect of Withered. So with this, our Wither instead applies 9% increased chaos damage taken and stacks up to 15 times, 135% increased chaos damage taken with full stacks. And the chance to apply Withered for 2 seconds on hit is nice with our Blade Vortex because it's got a very high hit rate. Nature's Adrenaline, FLASK gain 3 charges every 3 seconds. And then Nature's Boon. Magic utility of FLASK applies, you have 30% increase effect. This is so good. Increased FLASK effect, I'll explain in a sec. We're also getting some from each of these travel nodes. So 10%, 20% total from the travel nodes. FLASK have 20% increase effect, and then our magic FLASK have 30% increase effect. We're also getting increase effect here. So our FLASK have 50% increase effect. So all of these numbers, like 30% additional elemental resistances, that's getting improved by 55%. Same for all of these. That's why Pathfinder is so good and why we need to pay attention to our flasks. It's because of Nature's Boon. A lot of people want to use Master Surgeon. I don't want to use it. Nature's Boon is too good. While we are in the POB, let me just show you there are leveling gems and everything. I'll speak about leveling in a sec. We also have the swap to BV. We're going to be leveling with Poisonous Concoction. Then once we get Eldritch Battery, we get our Dendrobate, we can swap over to the primary gems, and then we have the extreme endgame gems, which are, you have a few hundred divines lying around, you can use these. Same for the items, we have default, we have defensive and extreme endgame. The extreme endgame, I'm not going to go over all of this gear now, but I will probably do crafting videos for a lot of these. This is when the damage gets kind of ridiculous. The POB also has a notes section that you can go down. However, I would recommend rather checking out the spreadsheet that I've made. For leveling, I have released a full leveling guide where I play from Act 1 all the way up to Act 10. Let's just have a look at the spreadsheet so I can show you what we're going to be leveling with. This is explained. So, firstly, there is a leveling gems section. This shows you which gems to take when, from which quest, how much it costs, which trial you need to do in which zone, which skill you need to get from which quest. All of this is here. I've also included explanations of the skill. We're going to be using Poisonous Concoction to level, and then eventually transitioning into Blade Vortex around level 50. So that is all explained. If you want to see the leveling video, it's linked in the description. The gems are all linked in the POB as well. But because it is so important, let's just talk about Poisonous Concoction. This throws a bottle that explodes to deal unarmed attack damage in an area and has a chance to poison. Can consume charges from a life flask to add further damage. Requires an empty main hand, so you cannot use a weapon with this. And then it consumes charges per projectile fired. Added chaos damage equal to 3% of Flask's recovery amount if charges were consumed. So while leveling with this, you do want to update your life flask regularly. Every 6 levels, you get a new life flask that has a higher amount of recovery, which will increase your damage. Also, another thing, when you're using Poisonous Concoction, you want to turn off auto equip. But this is all explained in the spreadsheet. Please just spend 5 minutes reading through that section. It will help the leveling process, or you can watch the full leveling guide, but it's all in the path of building. It's just from about Acts 1 to 6 that we're using Poisonous Concoction before we fully swap over into Blade Vortex. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check the description for all the resources you're going to need. The path of building, the spreadsheet, the video leveling guides are all there. The spreadsheet is super important. Any questions you may have, check out that spreadsheet, but also be sure to join the Discord. Follow me on Twitch if you want to ask exact questions, very specific questions. You can check those. Those are also linked in the description. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe, and I will catch you in the next video. Okay, bye-bye.
Exile, you're making me